As Pope Francis mentioned in Laudato Si, St. Francis of Assisi is one of the best examples we have of care for the vulnerable and care for creation. I'm Stephen, and this is Guardians of the Earth. Welcome back. Inspired by the Gospel and the example of St. Francis and St. Clare of Assisi, the Franciscan Action Network in the United States is a collective of Franciscan voices. Through the Franciscan Action Network, many people have sought to transform U.S. public policy on issues like gun control, climate change, human rights, and pushed for an end to poverty. We have a few questions here with Patrick. We are here today to speak with one of the former executive directors of Franciscan Action Network to learn about his experience and his thoughts on what it means to care for creation and even how to challenge that concept. So we're with Patrick. You've introduced yourself in the past as an agitator, a Catholic climate activist. What are the other titles you've used for yourself?
A storyteller, a writer, organizer. Yeah. I was the executive director of the Franciscan Action Network for 10 years. I was the co-founder of the Global Catholic Climate Movement. And I was honored in 2015 by the White House, by President Obama, for my work on faith and climate justice. And I'm a father of 4 children.
Wow. Well, it's a pleasure to be with you, Patrick, and talk a little bit about Franciscan Action Network. And I was actually curious to hear, when was Franciscan Action Network born? What's the origin story?
So Franciscan Action Network was started, it was around 2007. And it was a group of, and if you know anything about the Franciscan family, it's a large family and somewhat not always functional, disjointed at times. And because there's so many different parts of the Franciscan family, and there was a few folks in some that worked in the DC area and some that worked in other areas, and these were professed Franciscans, they're friars and sisters mostly. And they just started talking about how we have to come together as Franciscans to work on justice issues. So they had a big gathering in 2007 in Baltimore, where a lot of the different orders, the sisters, the friars, the secular Franciscans, even, there's a whole order of Episcopalian Franciscans. There's an order of Lutheran Franciscans. There's an order of ecumenical Franciscans. They were all represented at the meeting. And out of that meeting, they put together a committee to really come up with a plan on how the Franciscans can work together on justice issues in the United States. And out of that, the Franciscan Action Network was born. It was officially formed in 2009. They went through some starts and stops. I became the executive director in 2010. Kind of an interesting story about that. When I got hired as the executive director, I was living in Connecticut at the time. And so, I had working somewhere else. I had to get my notice and everything. And then about 2 weeks after I accepted the position, the chairman of the board called me up and she said, well, we're really happy that you've accepted the position, but we've run out of money, so we can't afford to pay you. But we hope you'll still come and become the executive director of the Franciscan Action Network. And I did. Luckily, my wife worked and made a really good income. So I could go down, and I had a niece who lived in DC at the time. So she said I could stay with her when I was down there. And that's kind of how we got our start. And from that, FAN has grown to be what it is today, which is one of the leading faith justice organizations in the country.
Wow, I am really surprised and grateful for your leadership, and I'm glad that it's grown so much since its origin story. Yeah. You mentioned it was focused on the U.S. primarily. Is the geographic reach, really encompassing Alaska, Hawaii, everywhere in the U.S., or what is the geographic scope?
Not so much Hawaii, but Alaska. We do have some Franciscans in Alaska. And so, yes, and even probably in Hawaii, but it's mostly the 48 contiguous states in the U.S. But it is, it's a Washington, D.C. based. So a lot of their work is in Washington, D.C., focused on policy and advocacy in D.C. So that encompasses, all of the states. And so certainly when we're talking about climate and oil drilling and things like that, that brings into play Alaska, as well as many other states.
Yeah.
And we
have seen that in
Network.
Definitely.
has worked collaboratively with groups like Franciscans International, which works at the United Nations and works around the globe. And we've worked with a lot of other Franciscan organizations, as well as other faith organizations.
I see. And if I understand correctly, there are 4 main focuses of Franciscan Action Network, correct?
Yes. Environment or climate.
Could you tell me what those are?
Yeah, the climate justice or environment, we sort of consider that the same. Immigration, human trafficking, and more recently, gun control, gun safety has been the 4th one. But also, we work on other issues. One of the things that is I liked about working in Washington, D.C., and particularly with Catholic organizations, is a number of Catholic justice organizations. And so we sort of come together as Catholic organizations. We came together, and some of them really focus on one issue, like poverty, take the lead on that. Others focus on, like we kind of took the lead among all these groups on the issue of climate and environmental justice. Others take the lead on others, and then we work together collaboratively on it, supporting each other.
It's very much living into the spirit of a network.
Yeah. And then we all worked with other faith groups. And, there's a whole coalition in DC of faith communities, faith organizations. And then, particularly when it came to issues of climate, we worked very closely with the lay climate organizations, the Sierra Clubs and World Wildlife Federation, and groups like that weren't faith oriented, the more secular groups. So we worked very closely with them as well.
At this time, especially now knowing the breadth of partnerships and coalitions and issues that y'all focus on, are there any major campaigns or actions that Franciscan Action Network is planning now?
Again, I'm not the ED anymore. I stepped down as the ED a year and a half ago. Michelle is the ED now, so she'd be better able to answer that than I would. I can tell you because I still do a lot of work with them, but one of their focuses now is they're creating what they're calling Franciscan justice circles, and so these are justice circles around the country so that people can come together. Both professed Franciscans and non-professed Franciscans, and start working together in a specific area, both on Franciscan spirituality, but then also on advocacy. And that's kind of one of their main focuses. They also still, as they always have, do a lot of work around immigration and climate justice. But building these justice circles is kind of a key thing.
And what's the best way to get involved? Should we shoot Michelle an email, or on the website there's a volunteer page? What's your guidance?
Shoot Michelle an email and tell her you talk to me. Michelle and I talk all the time. I helped her when I was leaving. I recruited her to take my job, and I have known her for a while, and she's wonderful. And it's an interesting thing because you're young, but you'll find this out as you get older. Sometimes when you run an organization, you reach a point where it's time to move on. And I felt that way with FAN. I knew I had taken it as far as I could take it, and they needed somebody else with a different skill set than mine. My skill set was excellent for the beginning when it was nothing, and to really organize it, get it going, build it up. But once we got to be a point where we were more stable and everything, and I was there for 10 years, but after that, I knew it was time for someone else to come in. And Michelle was absolutely the perfect person to come in and take my place. And so you should shoot her an email. If you
I'm so happy to hear that.
Send it to that. Yeah. I think, and
we'll encourage
organizations. I'm sorry.
No, go for it. Yeah.
I was going to say, and I've been around for quite a while, and I've seen this with organizations is to many of them, a key person in the organization stays too long, and the organization becomes about the person, not the organization. And the Franciscans themselves have a rule that you can only be in leadership for a certain amount of time. It varies between which community it is, but generally it's around 6 or 8 years. And then after that, you have to step down from leadership and somebody else comes in. And I felt at FAN that should hold true too. his work at all. Thomas Berry
Mhm.
was a Catholic priest. So he once wrote that if your story is not working, it's not, going forth, then you need to really reimagine your story. And that's where we are, that, our story isn't working. We have to reimagine it. And a lot of it centers around our whole theology that's, based on this idea that we're here so we can go there. Everything we do here is important only insofar as it helps us get there. And my view, and I've written a lot about this, is Jesus didn't come to die on the cross to save us from our sins. God didn't need to send somebody to die to save us from our sins. And so, and this, by the way, is not coming from me. This is coming from Bonaventure and Francis and John Scotus. I'm just kind of borrowing their words. And so if he didn't come to die on the cross, what was the purpose of the incarnation? And the purpose of the incarnation would be to create heaven here. Not to go to heaven, but to create heaven here. And so what we all should be working together on is creating heaven here. And what does that mean? I wrote an article about this one time, and I said, so imagine you woke up this morning and you got an email and you opened it up and it was from God, and you thought it's probably spam, so you were just going to delete it. But then you got a little curious, so you opened it up and it said, this is God. I decided to get serious about creating heaven on earth, and I need your help. So can you send me some ideas of what you think we should do to start creating heaven on earth? What would you write? And I went on to talk about all of that and explain all that and all. But that's, I think that's part of what you're trying to do, and what others are trying to do is we have to move away from this idea that we're here to go to heaven. We're here to create heaven. And we're here to create a heaven that's inclusive of all of our brothers and sisters. If you know the story of St. Francis of Assisi, and, there's a story about him going out and talking to the birds and talking to the trees. And, today he'd be arrested and sent away. But then, people sort of, wondered what he was doing. Why is he out talking to the birds? And I asked him, and he said, God told me to preach the gospel to my brothers and sisters. And these are my brothers and sisters. And so, we have to move away from this idea of separation. We have to move away from this idea of care for creation, because we're not here to care for creation. We're here to be in relationship with creation. And care for creation sets up a hierarchical dominionist. I wrote this too in an article. We evolved, we were dominionists, and then we evolved to the whole idea of caring for creation. But the idea of caring for creation is nothing more than a dominionist with a conscience. We have to move away from that and move into what, again, Francis and Scotus and Bonaventure talked about, was being in relationship with all of creation.